leaders get too full of themselves. I hate to say it, and they remove themselves farther and farther away from where the work is actually getting done. They might sound really good in meetings, and they're really nice people, and they're really smart, and not everybody's like that, so I don't mean to make a generic statement, but never forget why you're doing the work you're doing. As I was over 7 or 8 states at one time, what kept me honest was to go to these adolescent programs or the prison programs, even though I wasn't there day to day, and hang out with the clients and observe and show them that the leaders care.
Leslie A. Belonick is a dynamic and influential leader with over 38 years of experience in administering and developing evidence-based behavioral health treatment models, with a record of success spanning corrections, behavioral health, psychiatric, and women's services at local, regional, and national levels. Leslie is the founder-president of Belonick & Associates, a consulting firm specializing in the implementation of behavioral health policy to practice and research to practice initiatives. Leslie is the founding partner of the Police Treatment and Community Collaborative, PTAC, a national collaborative that provides vision, leadership, advocacy, and education to facilitate the practice of pre-arrest diversion across the United States. Currently, Leslie is a consultant for Ammon Labs, a 20-plus year leader in toxicology testing for behavioral health and addiction medicine.
I'm born and raised in Chicago or the surrounding area, and so that's my frame of reference. My family, upper middle class family, we moved to the suburbs, the same story that many have. And my family was a good family. They were not abusive. They didn't drink heavily. They gave me every opportunity that I could possibly want. But in that generation, if you were a woman, which obviously I was a young girl, and you were raised to be independent and raised to think for yourself, and I was one of these young women that was not a victim. Not that there haven't been some things that have happened to me in my life. You found that independence with your friends and outside of the home. Was raised with sports. We had horses and we skied, and I was very good and very competent. And in those days, everything was easy for me. I didn't have to stretch. I didn't have to work. Therefore, I wasn't pushed. In those days, the field was separated. There was the drug abuse side and the alcohol side, and never the twain shall meet. Different philosophies, different approaches, but it wasn't the core of what they did. And for those that they assessed at the time to have an alcohol problem along with having a serious drug problem, they would send to support and give them help. But that wasn't what you see today, or what you've seen in the last 30 years did not exist. It was a different world. And I got my life together in the drug abuse world and went after multiple attempts of, getting help. I ended up in a long-term residential treatment program, and then when I I think there was like 6 women in the program and 80 men. And in those days, it was tough. I mean, to me, when I think back, it was a lot of fun because there was a lot of action, a lot of drama, which is something I've always been attracted to. And so those days, even though this dichotomy, the alcohol folks thought it was like too confrontive. And so when I got my life together, it's a funny story, you guys. During that time, I was part of a couple of studies earlier on, but part of a study, and usually I was chosen, for the study because they needed a woman. And they needed a woman who could articulate, that could come across if was asked or been interviewed. They needed someone that can present herself well. Well, that was me, even though I was, I could do that. So whenever there was some opportunity, I was always chosen in to be that voice. They did a study on a local university came in and did a study on, I don't know, about 60, 70 of us on vocational skills, like a vocational assessment, like what do you want to be when you grow up? And everybody else came back, a nurse, a doctor, an accountant, a carpenter, normal professions. And they pulled me aside and said, we've never seen anything like this before. And I said, well, what? I kind of got scared, like, oh my God. And I said, what did it come back as? And they go, a foreign diplomat. And so I think just who I am was based on, relationships I built in any arena. I love people, and I love interacting with people anywhere. And so now in hindsight, obviously I didn't become a foreign diplomat, but my career kind of spun towards new horizons, to pioneer different things. And I never wanted to do what was already being done. I wanted to look down new frontiers. And in those days, the criminal justice system was a new frontier. And I was always chosen to kind of check it out for whoever I worked for at the time, because I was able to look at systems and how can we infiltrate? As the voice of the substance abuse field in those days, we want to infiltrate the court system, the prison system, the jail system, not to point fingers, but to help some folks. And then being who I am and who I've always been, I like to develop new concepts, the next thing. And so even though I administered treatment programs for many years in different settings, I always could develop those relationships, and those people that had so many biases towards addicts, for some reason, didn't have that bias towards me. But it was also not okay to talk about it in those systems. So you didn't go in there saying, I've been there, and it was frowned upon. In fact, in some, you had to use your judgment. But as a woman, a young woman, to go into the criminal justice system and talk about whatever we did in our lives, there was a judgment, and they automatically assumed, you were working a street corner, because that's what addicts do. Well, that's what women addicts do. And so I not that I'm judge anyone that did that. That wasn't my experience. I was the getaway car driver. Do you know what I'm saying? I was in the relationships I was with, they were long term, and they were good people. I can't look back to any relationship. I've been married twice where I was a victim. I might have made bad decisions, but I wasn't a victim, and I took responsibility for my choices. And maybe at times was a bad influence on them versus the other way around. So in the criminal justice system, that was a new arena. And I remember one of my first job, or not my first, but my second job, I went and worked as a intake counselor for a year in a large nonprofit drug abuse program, because that's what we referred to them in those days. And then the other job was working in the courts and breaking into Cook County courts and Cook County jail in order to help the suffering and to educate the system. And they don't hear you if they don't like you and if you're not genuine. At least that was my experience. And so I worked at 26 in California for 5 years. And as a part of that, there was one study so I was already entering into what would be my niche, even though I've done other things in the community and in business development. That was my niche. And, you were breaking into the system, you were educating judges. So every opportunity, just in the course of a conversation, I would educate and advocate for those defendants that were, at least the people that I represented, to try to get them to go to treatment versus prison, or to prison, to be sentenced to prison. They would, the judges would call me in the back, and after we gave our little, testimony and the outcome of the assessment, and they'd say, "What do you think, Les?" And I go, most of the time, I said, "I think he or she deserves a shot. I think they've made some really bad decisions, and they're, but I think this is a good candidate." But again, when you're pioneering, everybody can't be a good candidate, because then there's no validity to it, because they're not. I mean, and not that I'm God and I can say who's, but you get a sense of things, your instincts. And so, it got to the point where if I would have been farther along in my education at the time, I probably would have went on to law school and been, big famous criminal defense lawyer. That was like, oh, I like this. But I didn't. I stayed in this industry and worked in the justice system, the majority of what I've done for the last 40 years. In those days, you didn't even talk about addiction as a disease. The science that we have now did not exist, or didn't exist in the same terminology that we're hearing it today. And so it was about, there's a drug addict that needs treatment, and I want to advocate to try to get them to where they need to be. And so that's one piece of my life. And then, because I was one of the few women that was not in a secretarial role, right? I was asked to be part of another small research project to break into the prisons. Nothing was happening in the state of Illinois in terms of drug treatment in the prison. It was just unheard of. And this group negotiated a consulting contract with the Illinois Department of Corrections, and 3 of us were selected, again, like a Latino, a woman, and an African American. I checked 2 boxes. I was Caucasian, and I was younger than the other 2 gentlemen that were accepted, and we were hired to run groups in the prison. And something happened to me then. As I really saw what was going on in those prisons, and the fear of the people that came into my group, is like, we got to help these people. They're not serial killers. But for the grace of God go I. And, I just remember this one story where we were running a group. We were running a group once a week in Stateville Prison. Stateville Prison was the maximum security prison. And so the people, the offenders that were in that prison had committed some serious crimes, or not, or they did something, they were in front of the same judge so many times that finally the judge was just so aggravated. There was, because they didn't follow through with what they said they were going to follow through with, or they didn't get to treatment, that they finally ended up in prison. And in some cases they had no advocate, they had a public defender, many of which were good. I just never forgot this. There was this one man that came to group. He was white. The majority of them were African American that were in my group. He was Italian, and he was just like really, and I go, after a couple of groups, he says, "What's going on?" Because he kept moving around and juggling, and he goes, "You don't understand, they're going to kill me." And, I don't think I was naive, but I think I was naive to just how dangerous prisons are, or some prisons or some units. And this guy's he's just couldn't sit still. And I think about this young man to this day. And I'm like, I get come down, just get involved in programs. And no, you don't understand, they're going to kill me. And 3 groups later, he wasn't there, and they had killed him. And it was moments like that that touched me so deeply. Not that I was a realist that understood bad stuff happens, but it was so close to me then. So I'd never been in prison. I'd never been in jail. Any trouble that I got in, even as, my dad helped me out of that trouble. I came from a family with resources, but nothing serious like that. So those kind of stories touched my heart, not to the extent where I wanted to go save everybody, but I wanted to give opportunities for men and women to get their life together and do whatever I could do to build treatment within the walls, and eventually support that there was treatment once they went through treatment in the prisons, that there was support in the community. And then that same experience, and this is kind of what forms you as a what guides you and what forms you and builds the foundation as a professional. I had the Stateville maximum security prison, and then 2 days later I was in Dwight, and that was the maximum security women's prison. And I ran groups with the women, and those women just trusted me and talked to me about their lives because I wasn't judging them. They knew I'd been around. They didn't know my story because it's not about my story. It's about their story. And I respected their story. A kind word. It's not just like big science, or these big interventions or the doctor, or, it was about setting up a system of treatment in the prisons that cared and that gave the people in these dire circumstances hope. And that became my mantra, not to, like I said, not to save everyone, but to give them an opportunity to save themselves, given the right tools. And so, given who I was, and given just like the stars were aligned, there was dollars because there was a momentum in Illinois. At that point, Illinois was like at the head of the pack in terms of what we were doing in the criminal justice system. We really were. And we were breaking new ground, and there were dollars available for treatment. I mean, we had to advocate for those dollars to be allocated. And I took that as a challenge, and a challenge that I welcomed, and helped build the system in Illinois, in the prisons and the jails. Did I do it all? Of course not. But did I think I'd like to sit back, or those that know me real well, the passion for the work and that kind of middle road that thought that people deserve an opportunity for help, but when they get the help, let's make them work in there. I don't mean work, let's make it like they should still, people still need to be accountable for the choices they make. Just getting them, in those days, you have to remember, put it in the right context.
What year was this?
This was in the, I think I started working in the court system in 1979, 1980, end of 1979. And so all of this happened like 1980. I mean, I started to work in the court system, I believe it was 79. And in 1980, that's when I started getting chosen to do these kind of special projects along with my regular job. It was slower with the Illinois Department of Corrections. There wasn't treatment programs in the prisons. But there was like us, consultants that came in and did some counseling, but that was a breakthrough at the time. The Cook County Jail, which at that time was the largest county jail in the country and stayed that way, the biggest and, the largest in the country, I worked for the courts, and so because I was the only woman in that court unit that did the assessments, you had to do the assessments in the jail. I did assessments for men and women, but the women's division became my assignment. So you worked the courts, and then you interviewed the women in the jail. And did you ever see, you saw the play Chicago? What was the warden's name, the superintendent's name of the Cook County Jail in that movie? Claudia McCormick. The real lady, she was there at that time. I mean, that was kind of a takeoff of what was going. It wasn't her exactly, but that's what it was like. That production was very real. And that's the environment that you were in. So not only did I go, like I get court orders that, I kind of had progressed, court orders to go do assessments for the women. And, I'm this young white girl that I don't care what my story was. I wasn't one of them. I don't, what I mean? Nor did I try to be, which was, I think, what I just was genuine and was myself. And so the word, you develop a relationship and you develop a reputation that she's okay, you can trust her because she'll try to help. She won't help anybody, but she'll be honest. And it just, took off from there. There was a time where, like, my colleagues, like, they didn't even look at my ID. I just walked like I belonged because I did belong, But that was based on your reputation of being honorable. Not a miracle worker, but honorable. And so that's what the kind of work that I've done. And so there was a treatment program in the county jail. I still worked for the courts, and then eventually I went to work for one of the big treatment providers. There was a contract in the Illinois Department of Corrections for a fully dedicated drug treatment prison in East St. Louis. And we wrote we responded to the request for proposals, and we were awarded this contract. And I think that was in the early 90s or late 80s, early 90s. It was 671 beds. They had rehabbed a school in East St. Louis to be a prison, to be a minimum security prison, and it was a fully dedicated drug treatment prison. So we started that up where the entire prison was a treatment program and a prison. And I mean, we literally, me and my, at that time, my boss, John Bailey, who was an amazing man, they were being shipped from all over the state in the yellow bus, and we greeted them as they were coming out the bus and started this fully dedicated treatment program where the actual groups and educational seminars took place on the housing units. It wasn't like a medical model where Tuesday at 5 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you have a counseling session. No, the treatment happens on the unit. There's a structure on the unit where you're teaching life, life meaning real life skills. So anyway, we started this fully dedicated drug treatment prison, 671 beds, that actually is still in existence today. That agency isn't, they turn over different agencies. I'm not with the one that I was with at the time, but it was a legacy. I mean, I didn't do it myself because nobody can do this work themselves. And then I just worked in the field, and the company that I was with for 17 years as a senior vice president was not a senior vice president the whole time, but then eventually was a large nonprofit, like $100 million nonprofit in Chicago. We built that. I mean, we built it up through our reputation and our work, and not just not just corrections, but everything. And they sold the nonprofit. Well, they created a management company to prepare for sale, and kept the nonprofit and sold it to a private prison company. And I didn't know anything about private prisons, but I was a leader in that company, and there were staff that were there, counselors that had been there 20 years or so, and then all of a sudden the company was sold And none of them were at threat of losing their jobs, but, the opportunity where the prison company at that time was Cornell Corrections, that was since bought over by some of these large conglomerates, offered me a senior vice president job for that region. And the company that I was with offered me a job to stay. And at that point, it's like your integrity. It's like, I'm not going to leave these people with these treacherous private corrections. I've got to protect them, or at least pave the way. Because I was the front man or woman, when these people were looking at buying us, they go, send Leslie, to make friends and to establish. And they were nice people. They weren't bad people. You mean you can get prison contracts, help people, and make money? I went, yeah, you can do that. It's not one or the other, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. But I decided to go with the private corrections company and stayed there 5 years. And all of a sudden, I'm this nonprofit woman, professional. I'd worked hard to get where I was, the roll-up-your-sleeve kind of work. Their headquarters were in Houston. And the first senior executive meeting that I was, and we had to go every month to Houston and go to their executive director, and they were prison wardens and, or retirees from the federal prison system, because that's usually, they're not ready to retire, but they get their pension, and then they want the next chapter. It was so mind blowing, because they do this in-service, and they were pretty cool. There's an in-service, but it was on insider trading, and we're like, because it was a publicly traded company. What did I know about any of that? I didn't know about it. And so I just got drawn into that world. I stayed there 5 years, but it was bought out by a larger company, and it wasn't a nice place anymore. And so I left, because it just, I don't like being in meetings where you're going to negotiate serving soy at that time. It was just, it just didn't, it was not nice. During that process, because I'd done a lot of the work, I say I do it in prisons and jails, but a lot also did a lot of work with adolescents, high risk, involved in the justice system. And the rougher the better, I loved them more. The rougher they were and the angrier they were, I just felt like it was a cry for help, and all they needed was just someone to care and not judge them. And so that was another one of my things. And they keep you honest. Do you know what I mean? They keep you honest. And so I brought that with me, that experience with me, when I went to the private prison company. We put in a bid for a private juvenile prison in Arkansas. It was in my region, because that's more of a treatment model versus just a sole correction, and I was the treatment lady in the prison company. And so all of a sudden I was responsible, not the day-to-day warden, but administratively for this prison, this juvenile prison. And I'm going to be very honest with you, when we got the contract, because I'm good at getting contracts, I called my boss. I said, this is a 60-minute special waiting to happen. These kids are being abused. They're being locked in closets when they're bad. And at that point, I said, we should walk. And then I said, no, we got to help get these kids out. We got to, at least if we don't do anything, make sure they're safe. I busted out guards from the state system doing child pornography in the back office. That's a federal crime. And I just walk around and just get these my instincts, and say, that guy's, I don't want him anywhere near those children. And it's kind of always wasn't looking for that, you know what I mean? But it wasn't a healthy environment. So everything I learned in drug treatment, those skills that you learn can be applied anywhere. And in that particular juvenile justice training school right outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, were the Jonesboro brothers from the first school shooting, the young kids. It was the first school shooting. Those kids were there, and they were shorter than I am. They were just little kids.
Right.
And and there was a secure unit, like a secure unit within the prison walls, so to speak. There was a lot of acreage, and there was a barbed wire fence around the whole thing, which I'll tell you, and many times it took everything I had not just to open the gates and said, run, run, get out of here. And I wasn't that well versed with the South. I'm from Chicago. What do I know about Arkansas? And there was the secure unit, and then there was a girls unit with about 20 girls in there. And then there was only about 150 kids in this whole complex, but felt like 2,000. I mean, when you're dealing with kids, there was a school, there was a medical, and all of a sudden I'm responsible for this. And so, I was like looking at the data. You just see all these biases in the system, so the majority of the boys that were in this training school were African American. There was maybe a handful of white kids, but the girls were all white. Almost all of them were white. And I go, what's up with this? Well, it's because the girls had pictures of their black babies or their black boyfriends, and it's the bias in the system that to save them from themselves, we're going to detain them so they can't have more black babies. I mean, I hate to be this blunt, but that's basically what was going on. And so it just kind of hits you in the face that maybe, just maybe, you can't solve all the problems, but you can make a difference for these kids or these men or these women, that if they're in prison, let's make sure that they leave a better person so that they don't end up back. And so I just have those stories throughout, those aha moments that fueled me to continue breaking into different states and different situations and training, because I wasn't the counselor anymore. Building a team or building teams of people, you can teach people skills, but that work for you. You can send them to training, or they can go to school, but you can't, if they don't have that heart and respect, and where they treat people with respect and dignity, then they're not working for me. I'll train them if they're inexperienced, or send them to training and mentor, or make sure they get mentored. But without that heart and love, so you lead with love. It doesn't mean you let everybody get away with everything. I actually was known to be pretty strict, but you keep your standards high and they will rise. Because doing anything less than that is disrespecting who they are as people, as a race, as a gender. And I just felt very strong that if I can do anything to impact that, that's what I would commit my career to. I think it was my dad and my upbringing. Although it wasn't talked about it in those terms, he was, had 8 brothers and sisters, was very poor, had an 8th grade education, the same American dream story. When got back from World War II, started a furniture manufacturing company on Goose Island in Chicago. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chicago, which is like, right near some of the really cool Italian restaurants. You had the unions going on back then, and all that action, right? And the 3 brothers built the company where they had nothing. There was an Italian restaurant that was very famous in Chicago, the Como Inn. And the story goes that, they didn't even have money to eat because they were building this business. And so they had their meal. Mama Como Inn fed the brothers. And, at least that's where they went for lunch, But I watched my dad, this business became so successful that, they had a showroom in the merchandise mart eventually. I mean, they didn't furnish the Playboy mansion, but their furniture was in it. Some of the major hotels downtown, they did office furniture. I swear to God, I think they invented modular furniture and they never patented it, but we don't have proof of that because all the early pictures have these pictures of office modular furniture that like didn't even exist then. But I would go to the factory to pick up the car I wanted to, or whatever, because he did take care. He never gave me money, but we always had stuff. And I would see my dad, who was an owner of the company, and he was in there with the people, and he rolled up, and he worked with the upholsterers, and he worked with the every different, whatever it takes to make furniture. He was in there. He had sweat down to here, and they swore at each other. And I just saw my dad, and he just would do these like life lessons. If your name's on it, there's a sense of pride, and that pride should be based on not how much money you make, but the quality of what you do becomes your legacy. I just saw that my whole early life and emulated it, or just was attracted, just saw that. And just different life lessons. It's funny, he reminds me. So, what's your dad? Because we had horses, and it was like Ben Cartwright from Bonanza. Do you know what I mean? It becomes part of your character. That energized me. It didn't burn me out. In my mind, there's so many things that are broken. We as elders need to do a better job of bringing along the next generations, because the kinds of things that people are discovering with good intentions, there's lessons learned through these years that haven't been institutionalized. And so they're discovering it. And some of that is just, that's what happens. But I think that, we need to do a better job of mentoring and evaluating the degree, your master's degree or your license, even though that's critical, isn't going to make you good at what you do. There's so many people out there that are licensed to do clinical work that don't have it. They don't, the ability to engage and those like hope and lead with love and best practice. This is kind of one of my soapboxes, is best practices, which I believe in, but it's only as good as the person that's administering the best practice curriculum. If you're boring and you don't have it, I don't care what your degree is. I don't care what your personal experience is. They're not listening. And it's not them. You don't say this. It's so how do we develop, whether it's a counselor, a licensed person, a lead, a supervisor, how do we develop and select people that have it? And they don't have to all be like me. They know you care. I'm going to jump around here for a minute just to make a point, but one of the projects I developed with the company that I was with was another fully dedicated drug treatment prison, the Sheridan Correctional Center. And that's 1,750 men, medium security men, in a fully dedicated drug treatment center. And there's research tied to that. And aside from the work that has to get done to get those kind of contracts and to get it designed, the systems change work to even accept that this is something that can be done, that's one set of skills and a group of people that have to do that. The other set is that they're in a prison, and I don't care what these guys' backgrounds are, they can read you like a book. And if they think you're full of shit and you don't mean what you say, they're not listening to a word you said. And you don't have to know their name, and you don't have to have like this long-term relationship with them. But again, they could feel that you're trying to do something to help, or you're creating an environment where they can get rid of all these, you're sick as your secrets, and they feel safe enough. And I used to get like a lot of flack that, though they don't talk about their feelings in prison, I went, oh, that's nonsense. You know, everyone has feelings, and given the right situation, you don't want to leave them vulnerable, but this is a treatment prison, and this is supposed to be about getting help. And so let's create an environment where that's okay. In terms of the criminal justice system, whether it's the courts or the prison or the jails, it was the leadership that was in place at that time, throughout at that time, that embraced or was open to some solutions that they might not have thought before, or they were a little bit nervous to implement something new. And even in the treatment programs, it's leadership or lack of leadership. And I think that when me and my colleagues have been most successful is when there's leaders in the justice system that are really good and that want. So there's people like me that lead in Department of Corrections or the jails or the courts, or judges that are, just because of their own personal experiences or wisdom, know that arresting people and putting in prison is not going to solve this problem. And so I think that when it goes south is when the selection of leaders are not open to anything new or afraid to make changes. Who has the courage to step up and not make it a political issue? Because that happens, your appointees, everything is political. So who has the courage to step up and advocate for the right thing? Training is critical for the counselors and the therapists that are doing the work in the trenches. And who are the leaders, and who are the next generation of leaders? And I think that what I've seen as a field, except for certain agencies or, when I've done national work, you have to be promoted to make more money, so they lose their really good staff because they have their families to raise. They might love the work they do, but they go for the next level and the next level because that's the only way that they can grow, and the value of being the hands-on person and being compensated for that so that you can live a decent life and take care of your family, you have to go someplace else to do it. Leaders get too full of themselves, I hate to say it, and they remove themselves farther and farther away from where the work is actually getting done. They might sound really good in meetings, and they're really nice people, and they're really smart, and not everybody's like that, so I don't mean to make a generic statement, but never forget why you're doing the work you're doing. As I was over 7 or 8 states at one time, what kept me honest was to go to these adolescent programs or the prison programs, even though I wasn't there day to day, and hang out with the clients and observe and show them that the leaders care. Even if I wasn't going to be back the next day, it's critical to model that, but it's also critical for yourself as a leader not to lose touch with what the work is and who the people are. It's not just about money. It's not just about new contracts. It's about the work you do. The whole game that gets played with managed care, yes, the managed care, the reimbursement rates, not getting paid enough for the services that are provided, and all of those things are critical. But I tend to think, looking back, that if all those things were solved tomorrow, there'd still be problems. Because you'd want more. We all do. I used to get kind of slapped on the hand saying, Leslie, I don't want to be the biggest. I just want to be the best. the best means that the work that I'm responsible for, or was responsible for, doing consulting work now, helped people. And maybe helping people might not mean that even the client, but even creating a learning community within our organizations or our prisons or our jails, a learning community where people are learning, and it's okay not to know everything. But what's not okay is if you do not respect and honor the lives or acknowledge or have an understanding of the lives. And I don't just mean the poor, or this disease touches the hardest program I ever ran was not the prison program in terms of the population. They were a piece of cake. It was the wealthy that were in the hospital unit that thought the world owed them something, and their mother picked up their laundry, and brought them pasta at night, or they would be mad or they would leave. I mean, that was a more difficult population to engage. Not that they were bad, they were great. They were characters. It was fun. It was me. Do you know what I mean? But they were more challenging than the men and women and kids in the prison, because they didn't understand. I mean, in many cases, didn't really understand or have a sense of the consequences on any level. I mean, unless there was a death or, something really serious. For a moment in my career, I left the private prison company and then was recruited. I had some health issues, and so I left the job. I was recruited by the Illinois Department of Corrections to work for them, and as the senior policy administrator over reentry. And it was like a full-time professional services contract, And ironically, it was when Blagojevich was the governor of Illinois, and he developed all of these really, really cool things. The Sheridan Project was under his watch. Systems change with the parole offices, Project Spotlight, work in the women's division. I mean, did he do it? No, but he's smart enough to hire the right people that cared about the right things. And while I learned a lot, I thought I knew a lot about government. And I thought I knew everything about government. I've got these government contracts all these years, until you're inside government. And I was lucky enough, I guess, that I didn't, because of who I reported to, and it was just this small team, I wasn't part of the bureaucracy. It was kind of like off to the side. And we were to develop new concepts, and I found federal money, Voitus dollars, that were supposed to be used to build new prisons, and we found an honest, legitimate loophole, an argument with the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, who was the money, that was the pass-through of the money, the attorney, the general counsel there. Collectively, we found a loophole that says these millions and millions of federal dollars to build new prisons were available. So states were building prisons all over. And what Illinois did at that time was make the argument that, well, we want to build, if we need a new, we want to empty beds for nonviolent offenders so that there's more room for the violent offenders, so we don't have to build new prisons. And so that was our argument, to be able to use some of this money for reentry and stuff that normally everyone would look like they won't allow you to do that. It has to be bricks and mortar. But there's got to be a way, or a legitimate way around this. That's crazy. And so we we developed the argument that said, no, but if we put prison treatment in the prison, or expanded and enhanced treatment and reentry services that start in the prison, and use that money for that, even if it's a new building. Okay, we'll build a new reentry housing unit. That would stop the recidivism and free up beds for violent offenders. And so, we did that. But what I learned is we would get like these huge contracts from the federal government for treatment, and we would put it out for bid, to the providers, either to do it in the prison or do reentry. And then you go around and say, well, we're waiting for the whatever documentation needed to go through. And so I would go around to the different offices going, why is this stopped? It's approved. We got it. It's approved. What's stopping it from happening? And they would just look at you. This one woman would look at me and say, oh, I never got it. Well, I had learned just by instinct that whatever I gave them needed to be in a colored file, like a yellow, file, just because on her desk was a stack of papers that she hadn't even probably looked at. She said, I never got it. I said, isn't it that yellow file at the bottom of your pile? What? No. Sure enough, there it was. And so there needs to be someone inside that's moving things, that has the support of the bureaucracy, that's not doing anything, illegal or, is not deviant, but that is going to push the system forward, save it from itself. Whether it's a prison or state government or the federal government, there's really, really dynamite, wonderful people, and then there's people that have seen so many politicians come and go, so many different administrations, so many different parties come and go, that they just sit back and say, here we go again. So I don't know what the solution to that is, but it's leadership that understand it's not just the top people. It's how do you infiltrate a culture and change. It's really a hard task.